You are listening to Fierce Feminine Leadership, episode number 186 with Laura Vanderkam.
Welcome to Fierce Feminine Leadership, the success podcast for women in business. Each week, we feature interviews and advice to help you step into your power and lead your way. Now here's your host, women's leadership expert, Eleanor Beaton.
Hey there, Fierce Ones. Eleanor Beaton here, and welcome back to another episode of Fierce Feminine Leadership, the success podcast for ambitious women in business. This is episode number 186, and today we are diving into the lies women tell ourselves about time with my special guest, Laura Vanderkam. So I don't know about you, but anytime I open up Facebook or a women's magazine or a blog, a popular blog, I will see numerous articles about how to be more productive, efficient, how to manage our time better. And I know that inside our community of fierce women, figuring out strategies to get more out of each and every day is something that is a major preoccupation. We've got a lot on the go. Well, today's guest is an expert in the area of time management and productivity. Laura Vanderkam is the author of several time management and productivity books, including my favorite, I Know How She Does It. Including my favorite, I Know How She Does It, What the Most Successful People Do Before Breakfast, and 168 Hours. Her work has appeared in publications including Fast Company, Fortune, USA Today, and the Wall Street Journal. And she lives just outside Philadelphia with her husband and 4 kids. So here's the deal. When it comes to managing time better, as Laura points out in her blog, there is so much advice out there about the specific kind of morning routine that you need, exactly how to block out your time. But here's the deal. The truth is that as women, as people, but particularly as women, we don't necessarily have an accurate gauge of how we truly spend our time. And as Laura argues today, until you actually know how you truly spend your time, it becomes difficult to not just manage it, but get the most out of it. So I am so excited for today's interview because she's going to reveal some really fascinating research that she has accumulated over the last decade. She's going to take us into how she is able to create an immense body of work around productivity, time management, writing books, writing articles, blogging 4 times a week while raising 4 kids, the youngest of whom is 2. She's going to talk about some of the myths around what it truly means to lean in and have a big career. It's a fun, insightful interview. I can't wait to share it with you. But first, we're going to hear from our fierce sponsors, BMO. Do you sometimes worry about your financial future, but struggle to find the time to learn more about managing your wealth? Are you a female entrepreneur interested in taking your business to the next level, but don't know where to turn for help? Do you want to be more proactive managing your finances, but need some support in taking that next step? If so, then it's time to claim your financial power and get the support you need. Our fierce sponsor, BMO, the Bank for Women, is a smart first step, and you can join the conversation by visiting bmoforwomen.com. Come on! Laura Vanderkam, welcome to Fierce Feminine Leadership.
Thank you for having me.
Well, really delighted to have you here on the show because obviously time management and productivity is a huge concern and preoccupation for so many of our listeners. This is an area where you have created an immense body of work. And my question is, where did your fascination with productivity and time management begin? Take us back to the beginning. You know, was this with you as a kid? Is this something that developed later in life? Where did it get started?
Well, as I think back, I've probably always been interested in getting stuff done. I'm one of those people who likes to-do lists and all that. But I really became fascinated with the topic because I became fascinated with the subject of time itself. There's fascinating data sets on how people have spent their time now, how they spent it in the past. And basically, how we think we spend our time often has very little relation to how we actually spend our time. And I think I'm just a born skeptic. So I love topics like that, where the conventional wisdom, I think, is wrong. I mean, just looking at, for instance, how women spend their time. We have this idea that, women in the 1950s and 60s, the Ozzie and Harriet era, must have been spending so much time with their children. And it's not true. Actually, women spend more time interacting with their children now than they did in the 1950s and 60s. And that's true even though women spend more time working for pay now as well. And so I was fascinated by this, and I got really into this topic and was writing a lot about it and talking with a bunch of publishers and had people explain to me, like, listen, nobody wants to read a book on like this academic subject of time use. So why don't it become a time management topic? And, as I started writing about it, I realized I enjoy this too. I love talking to people about how they spend their time and how we can all spend it better. So that's really how it all happened.
So it's fascinating, this idea that the way that we think we spend our time has very little relationship to how we actually spend our time. I know that one of the time management strategies that you use, and of course you've got a great blog post about this, which was really interesting to me, because if there's anybody whose time management and productivity habits I'm going to pay attention to, it's yours. But you talked about how for years you have logged your time in 30-minute chunks, correct?
I have, yes.
So tell us, why do you do that, and what have you discovered about the nature of time and the relationship between how you think you spend it and how you actually spend it?
Well, I began doing this because I thought it would be interesting to study my time holistically. I mean, interesting to me. I'm not sure if it's interesting to anyone else. But, I'd had so many people keep track of their time for a week here and there, and I had tracked my time for weeks here and there over the years. And so I thought, well, let me see what happens if I just keep going, if I keep tracking my time continuously. And it has other benefits too. And that's sort of like a journal. I mean, I can see what I did with my day. It doesn't have the same sort of like judgment calls and thought processes that journaling does, but at least I can see what I did. And so I, did it for a while. And after I got through the first year, I added up various totals. And I saw that, even with me, there were things that I would have told myself that turned out not to necessarily be true. I used to think I worked about 50 hours a week, and that's because the various weeks I had tracked over the years, I worked about 50 hours a week. But it turned out that I had been choosing very specific weeks to track, namely weeks when I worked 50 hours a week, because I wanted to see myself as the kind of person who was working 50 hours a week. And when I tracked my time continuously, of course, I couldn't do that. I couldn't be selective like that. And so I saw that, in fact, the overall average was closer to 40 hours a week. And 40 is a different number than 50. And so if really the reality is I'm working closer to 40 than 50, then I need to be a bit more careful about where those 40 hours go. So that was something I learned. Also interesting to me is that one way or another, my body seems to aim at 7.4 hours of sleep per day. And that is what I just think of as my number now. And I can see, that doesn't mean that I sleep every day, 7.4 hours. It doesn't even mean that every week I sleep, 51.8 hours, which would be 7 times 7.4. But that over the long haul, like if you look at me over like a 2-month period, that's what it will average out to. And in fact, the first year I tracked, the average was 7.4. The second year I tracked, the average was also 7.4. So as you can see, over the long haul, that's what I aim to. And it's funny because I certainly don't sleep that every day. And so in my mind, I'd be thinking of like, oh, well, I'm, not getting my sleep. And then I realized, well, I make it up one way or the other. Like after a couple of nights that are bad, I might crash really early, or I might try to catch a nap on weekends. And so over time, this is the number that I aim for.
This is so interesting to me. So you track it, do you track it 7 days a week?
Oh, yeah.
And it's not just working hours.
Now, I have a question for you. Why did you ask that question?
Because I was thinking about the time it would take to track your time.
Well, it doesn't. It really doesn't take that much time. It's funny because for many people, weekends are like this totally separate thing than the rest of life. It's almost as if it like doesn't exist as part of life. And there's so many weird ways people have this mental picture. Like, so my time logs go from 5 a.m. Monday to 5 a.m. Monday. That strikes me as kind of a normal think of a week, right? Like a week starts on Monday morning.
Yep.
If you think about that, the halfway point, 5 a.m. Monday to 5 a.m. Monday, the halfway point is 5 p.m. Thursday. And I know that a lot of people when thinking about, well, where's the halfway point of the week? You don't think 5 p.m. Thursday. That sounds like the end of the week, right?
That's
getting toward the end of the week, but it's not. It's the exact halfway point. And so there's just as much time after that as there is before it. And often we become very sort of interested in what our lives look like Monday through Thursday and don't even think about what our lives look like Thursday through Sunday, even though they probably look very different and there is just as much time in that. I've also asked people to keep track of their time for workshops and say, okay, keep track for a week. And they only give me 5 days. And I'm like, well, where was the weekend? And they're like, oh, I didn't think you meant track the weekend. And I'm like, well, that's fine if you don't want to talk about it in this, workshop. But that's funny that you made that assumption that the only thing that mattered was Monday through Friday and that there's nothing on the weekends you want to talk about. Well, how do I use my weekends? What would I like to do with my weekends? Maybe there's more fun I could be having if I thought about it a little bit more. So yes, I do track all 7 days. It only takes me about 3 minutes a day. So 21 minutes a week. Which is, about the same amount of time I spend brushing my teeth, which I find a useful thing to do. So I'm willing to keep with it.
So interested in this. When you think about, back on the years that you have tracked your time, what do you think are some of the biggest net benefits from having done that and having had that record of observation?
Well, I certainly think that knowing that I'm working less than I think I am is important because it's made me far more disciplined about how I actually use my work time. But with that, I say, well, I feel like I am, for the most part, achieving my professional goals in the time that I'm working. So maybe I don't have to be so worried about it. Maybe if I want to take daytime adventures on occasion, I can do that. And so I've been a bit more cognizant about scheduling in adventures like that. An interesting thing I found is that first year I read 327 hours, which sounds pretty decent. That's like close to an hour a day over the course of the year. But when I thought back on it, I couldn't think of really that many great books I had read in those 327 hours. And as I looked at it, I saw a lot of it was newspapers and magazines and such like that was maybe not what I wish to be spending all that reading time on. And so I've become much better over the past few months as I've continued with time tracking and using that time for reading actual books, that I've started carving out time to figure out what I'm going to read next. And because I've planned out my reading, I have good books to read. And when I have good books to read, I'm more likely to turn any given leisure time into reading time. I'm also making better uses of those little bits of time that are great for just looking at social media, to read books on the Kindle app on my phone. And so that right there has increased my reading time. And then I'm making better use of the time that already exists.
One more question on this topic before we move on, because I know that based on what you've just shared, we're going to have a lot of listeners who want to go and start tracking their time. How do you actually do it? Do you have a spreadsheet? Do you do it on your phone? Do you have an app? Do you do it old-fashioned style, pencil and paper? How do you actually do it?
I use a spreadsheet. So it's just Excel, very boring sort of Excel thing. If your listeners want to download one, I have a sign up form on my website. I'll email you one, but it's just got the half hours along the left side of the page going from 5 a.m. to 4:30, and then the days of the week across the top. So picture a 336 cell worksheet, and then I just fill it in each week. I am very not into tracking minute by minute. The half hour blocks works for me. I mean, other people might wish to do more detail or less detail. It's kind of something you have to figure out what works for you. But for me, half an hour is enough. I can give a broad outline of what I do. I mean, I'm willing to just say work or sleep or hang out with kids or read or something like that. I don't try to track every single minute. And that makes it doable. That's what keeps it at those 3 minutes a day as opposed to, 3 hours a day, which would make it far less doable. But the tool itself doesn't really matter. I mean, so I use spreadsheets. I find them pretty intuitive. You can just keep a journal, like writing it down in a notebook. You can use a time tracking app. There are dozens on the market. Some of those have particular benefits for people who also need to track time for work, because if you were, for instance, making invoices, like that might be a function you wanted from a time tracking app. But that's sort of just, you figure out what kind of bells and whistles you need. I find that the spreadsheet is good for starting, and then if you find you need something fancier, you can do that later.
Got it. Okay, love it. So one of the things that you must hear a lot, I know I hear it, is this idea that I don't have time. What has your work in time management, productivity, studying the lives and habits of highly successful, productive people, what has that taught you about this recurring belief in our society that I don't have time?
Well, when we say I don't have time, in general, what we mean is it's not a priority for me. And that is often perfectly legitimate. We just don't want to say it, right? It's like, I don't have time to read this thing you sent me. Well, that's not true. Like, if you offered to pay me $100,000 to do whatever it is, like, I'd probably do it, right? Like, I would find the time magically enough. So it is not that I don't have time. It's that it is not like high enough up my priority list for me to justify doing. And that's not necessarily saying that you want to tell people that explicitly, but as long as we have that language in our minds, then that puts us back in control over the time and our choices about time and where the time ultimately goes. And I find that the more hours we can feel ourselves exercising control over, it's a great feeling. And we start wanting to exercise more and more control and expand that sphere of the time that we believe we can control. And that's how you start building the life you want in the time that you've got.
Now, in your book, I Know How She Does It, How Successful Women Manage Their Time, I believe you interviewed, it was more than 1,000 women, did you not? Or it was based on...
It was 1,001 days.
1,001 days, that's it.
So, yeah, it's fewer than that women, because women were tracking a whole week.
Got it.
1,001 days turns out to be 143 weeks.
Got it. Love it. So in this study of 1,001 days, 143 weeks, what surprised you the most about these women, how they were managing their time, how they were making it all happen?
Well, I was very gratified to see that women had far more balanced lives than I think the popular narrative conveys. These were all women with big jobs, okay? These were not like, let me just try and work a few hours a week and see how it goes. I mean, these were all big jobs that these women had. And they also had children at home. So they had a lot of things going on in their lives. And the average work week for them was 44 hours a week. Now, 44 hours is more than 40, but it's not a lot.
That's not 70. That's not 70.
And so I find that that's something I would really wish I could tell, like, every young woman who's contemplating career choices, because we often think that, oh, well, the family-friendly jobs, I should go for a family-friendly job that'll have fewer hours. You know, it might pay less, but I'll work a lot fewer hours. The average woman earns less than $40,000 a year working about 35, 37 hours a week in there, if you look at the time diary data. These women I studied had six-figure jobs and worked 44 hours a week. So I'm not saying that it's like you could automatically earn a six figures by adding those extra 7 hours a week, but the gap between the kind of jobs that pay six figures and the kind of jobs that pay nowhere near that is not as huge as you might think. So you might ponder some of those big jobs that you think might be more demanding, knowing that often it's the big job that allows you more flexibility and autonomy and cash, which we should not undervalue for all the things that cash allows you to do in life. And so I wish that young women would get that message.
That's really interesting. And I think it sheds a whole new light on the concept of leaning in and what that means. You know, that leaning in may actually only mean a few extra hours, a few additional hours a week, but actually a potential maximum upside.
There are maximum upsides. And especially since the way women work these hours was often flexibly. Like, I was amazed how much flexibility women had in their jobs, even people who were in careers that you would never think of as like flexible. I mean, they were lawyers, they're doctors, you know, engineers. People were still doing personal things during their work hours. And partly is because that they had these high-powered jobs where they could get away with it. I mean, honestly. But that's something to consider, right? Like, you might actually have a lot less flexibility in a so-called family-friendly, less demanding job. So again, it's just something to think about. And the way they were often working these hours is they'd work some at night after the kids went to bed, or they might put in a few hours on the weekend, so that in fact they were often home at reasonable hours. I mean, it was certainly not that people never saw their kids for dinner or never were able to do school drop-off in the morning. And that wasn't the case at all. I saw all kinds of things like that on the time logs.
Why do you think the myth pervades then? Because it's so interesting what you're saying is that we do have an almost systemic blindness to how we really use our time. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's partly that people think of life in terms of days instead of weeks. We live our life in weeks. I mean, a week is definitely the cycle of life as you sort of plan things and picture things. But we think of the time in days. And so we're like, well, there's not enough time in 24 hours to do everything I want to do. And again, it's the 24 hours between Monday and Thursday we're thinking about. We're not picturing the 24 hours that happen on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. Those are, again, not in people's minds, which is a problem when you're trying to figure out how everything fits together. There are 168 hours in a week. If you work 40 hours, which is a full-time job, and sleep 8 hours a night, which is 56 hours a week, that leaves 72 hours for other things. Like that is a lot of time.
That's a lot of time.
That is a lot of time. There is no way you can say, oh, well, if I work full-time, I will never see my children. That is just false. It is completely false. It is a line that people tell women because they want them not to do the great things that they could do. I mean, honestly.
Ooh, that's a writer downer. That's so interesting, though. That's okay. I love it. So listen, when it comes to these 1,001 hours that you tracked, so we've talked about what surprised you. What would some of the other big trends have been that you saw in terms of how these powerhouse women are making it all happen in that 168 hours?
Yeah, so work-life integration was definitely the name of the game. 3/4 of the women did something personal during their work hours in the course of their diary week, whether that was visit a kid's school or meet a friend for lunch or do a workout or anything along those lines, right? 3/4 also did something work-related during what might be considered personal hours, so nights, weekends, early mornings. And I really think the two are totally related. It's one that enables another. And so, sometimes people get all like, oh, I did work at 9 o'clock last night. Life is terrible, horrible, whatever. It's like, well, except it's just the nature of life that if you want to go and volunteer at your kid's school at 9 a.m. and then you can make up that work at 9 p.m., that sounds good to me, right? That sounds like we're firing on all cylinders. And so I think that by leaving all 168 hours open for anything, women were able to work the longer hours they needed to while also having very fulfilling personal lives too.
Is there any particular interview subject or research subject in this book that stuck out to you or jumped out at you in terms of her ability to achieve that integration or surprising things that she was able to achieve in that same time that the rest of us have?
Yeah, well, one that was interesting for me is just showing how long hours do not preclude a full personal life. This one woman I studied who was a partner at a consulting firm, which if any of your listeners are familiar with the major consulting firms, generally the thought is, oh, you'll travel all the time, you'll never be home, long hours, whatever. And in fact, she was gone like a couple nights during the week. So if we wanted to construct a story of like, oh, she came in Wednesday night and had to just give her sleeping children a kiss because she didn't see them all day. Oh, life is terrible, horrible, whatever. We could do that.
Her heart was getting ripped out.
Her heart is getting ripped out, but it wasn't, because the next morning she's bringing her kids to the dentist and hanging out with them and then bringing them to school late. Like they made a little fun morning of it. The next day she was at the school too. She was working out. She and her husband did a coffee date on the weekends while the girls had piano lessons simultaneously. They did a family game night Thursday night. She went out with some friends. They went skiing one day. They did, this was during the winter when she tracked her week. And I'm like, wow, that's a lot of stuff. So which one are we talking about? Like, are we going to talk about, oh, she had to give the sleeping children a kiss because she didn't see them all Wednesday? We're going to be like, oh, look, Friday afternoon, she's at home making this gorgeous Pokemon cake for her daughter's birthday. Like that does not fit in the story, right? That's not the story we tell. And in fact, one of the reasons I put that story early in the book is because one of the things that inspired me to write this book is I was on the phone with a young lady who had left her consulting job because she said, I looked around at the senior women at my firm and there was no one whose life I wanted. And I was like, well, let's look a little harder. All right.
That's so interesting because that's certainly a narrative that you do hear
about
powerhouse women, which does impact how we view those big jobs.
It's another way of keeping women down. It's like, oh, you can succeed, but then the people who are around you are going to say, like, I don't want her life. It's like, well, are you sure you don't want her life? What do you know about her life? Maybe you just see her at certain times. You're not seeing her again on like Friday morning where she's having coffee with a friend. You're not seeing her on Saturday afternoon where she's going for a bike ride with her kids. You're not seeing her that she, in fact, you think she's off traveling somewhere Tuesday morning. She just came in late because she wanted to like go to the kids' school for a while. You don't know. You can tell yourself that story if you want, but it may not be the case.
Well, this is so interesting because I think it's another take in some ways on unconscious bias. So it's this unconscious bias that we may have about what a person's life must be like based on these myths that we have about time management. For example, when I was doing research about you, you have, as I said in the intro, you've produced a significant body of work with, blogs and books and research and articles, and you're interviewed all over the place for great media outlets, and you have 4 kids. And I remember thinking, wow, how does she do it? I wonder how she does it. I wonder if she gets up at 4 a.m. I wonder, how do you manage your time? And what is your kind of rhythm like to make this big career and big family life happen? Does your heart get ripped out?
No, my heart doesn't get ripped out. Well, I mean, because I know I spend a ton of time with my kids. I can see it right there on my time log. So if I had any tendency to feel guilt about it, it would be completely gone because I'd look at my time log and be like, wow, like it's an incredible quantity of time interacting with my children on here. There's a lot of things. I'm good about thinking about what I want to be spending my time doing and making sure those things happen. And when you're good about thinking about what actually matters for me to do and making sure those things get time on your schedule, then it's not that hard to keep making progress. I think people get very busy with stuff that doesn't matter. And I'm very judicious about avoiding that. And some of that is self-employment. Like, I won't lie. I run my own business. So I am not going to spend a whole lot of time doing stuff that I don't want to do. But, I'll push back on stuff too. I mean, I have a speaking career. I speak lots of places. And it's funny. Sometimes I'll have people be like, okay, well, we need another conference call about, what you're going to say in your speech. I'm like, we really don't. Like, I mean, you can hire me or not hire me. But I think we've established what I'm going to talk about. You can watch videos of me online if you want to get another impression of it. I'm happy to make sure we've got all the details down and assure you of that. But I want to see what is actually going to be conveyed in this next conference call that we want to have. And I will push back on it. And, it's just about making sure that your time is spent on things that matter. And we can all do that. I mean, it's easier working for myself, but I think anyone can push back a little bit more than we probably think we can.
Sure. And I mean, I think one of the big themes that's coming out of this conversation is just to be aware of the narratives that we tell ourselves. And that we get caught up. For instance, if I work for somebody else, I can't, or if I work inside an organization, I can't do this, i.e. the management consultant that you talked about. Working in an environment that the story about that culture is you can't do those things. But obviously that's not true.
Well, you can do whatever you want. What I think is funny is women are like, well, I need to quit because I want to have the life I want. I was like, well, if you're going to quit anyway, like, why don't just do what you want to do? And maybe they'll fire you, but they probably won't. I mean, it's what you can get away with, because nobody sees a lot of this stuff too. I mean, people are in their own little worlds, honestly. And people be like, I have to be in my desk when my boss walks in. Like, do you know? I mean, do you think she's really counting everyone in their seats? Like, how do you think she does? Maybe you're in the bathroom. Like, honestly, she doesn't know. And so it's, these narratives we tell ourselves. And I would encourage people to think about them and think hard and see what you can push back on, especially if there's something that is truly keeping you from living the life you want, then see what you can do. And sometimes it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission.
I was recently at a symposium for women lawyers, and it was really interesting. So there was a woman who was presenting some research that she'd done on secrets of, high-performing women lawyers. And one of the themes was to ask for forgiveness, not permission. And she was talking about an associate lawyer who made it to partner in record time, and she showed up for work at 10 a.m. So she'd take her mornings to do her thing. In this law firm, it was totally unheard of. She made partner in record time. She just preferred to work, later at night versus in the morning. She wanted to take time for herself in the morning. And for some listeners, that may not seem like a big deal, but it was actually quite, on the books at least, it was a big deal for an associate not to show up at 10 a.m. And when the researcher was asking her more about it, she said, look, I didn't even think to ask permission. I don't even think anybody noticed. If they had problems with it, I never heard about it because I didn't bring it up. And she was basically doing what she wanted to do, accomplishing the results, like she was making it happen. And you're so right. I don't think people are watching us the way that we think, provided we're getting the big priorities done. So that's interesting. Now, one of the things, in the kind of legend of time management and productivity these days is this focus on morning routines. And you have a book about what the most successful people do before breakfast. That's the title of the book. What did you learn? What are they doing before breakfast?
So mornings are a really great time for anything that is important to you that life has a way of crowding out. So if you do wind up working late hours, for instance, it's probably best to get that workout in the morning. You might also spend morning hours with your family. For instance, if family dinner is not happening that frequently because of later work hours, family breakfast could be a great substitute for that. I mean, it's still a family meal. It's still time you can have together. There's nothing wrong with substituting that for dinner. Or people have personal projects they want to get to. If you want to write the great American novel, you can wait until the end of the day and see what time is left over to do it. But I can already tell you there's not going to be any time left over at the end of the day, and you won't have energy for anything except watching TV. Whereas if you get up in the morning, you might be able to write a couple hundred words a day and actually get a draft in a year. And so it's good to think about mornings as time we can have if we choose to use it, that we can often dictate where these hours go. Now, I want to be clear here that not all phases of life lend themselves to using morning hours really well. I think I do use my morning hours fairly frequently, but I also have a 2-year-old who wakes up incredibly early. There's almost nothing I can do about that. We've tried. Like, I get tips from people all the time. I'm like, trust me, we've tried. I know it will get better eventually. He may never wake up later, but like within 2 years, he'll be able to turn on the TV by himself. So I'll be happy with that. It's just that I have to be with him, or if, my husband it's his morning, he can be with him. And so, I can do some things on some mornings when he has them, and some mornings I will get up and run when my husband is taking the 2-year-old. But other mornings I just have to say, okay, well, I can't use this for what I want right now. Let me still focus on what I can do. That might be fun. We often go out in the backyard and play. We're recording this in the summer, and it's nice weather, so we don't have to go out in the morning, and I'll have my coffee and he'll play in the backyard. So, use it for what you can. It doesn't mean I can necessarily work more in the morning, which might be what I would choose to do, work on focus projects in the morning, but I can still use it for something
that's valuable to you.
Yeah, something that's valuable to me.
Yeah, love it. Who inspires you and why?
Well, I take inspiration from lots of different people. I'm always inspired by the senior women in organizations where I go and speak, and who are willing to share their time logs with me, and often share them with their colleagues too, when we do workshops on this. And I often see just how much people are thinking about, well, what would I like to be spending my time doing, and how can I make that happen? And I can just tell on a log when somebody is thinking through their time versus when they are not. And it's when I do see things like morning workouts. Like, you don't accidentally work out in the morning, right? Like, you have to think about...
As much as we might want to.
It does not just happen.
That's right.
You have to think about it. Or when I see, what I love to see, oh goodness, when people keep track of a whole week, and I see that Monday morning has been blocked out for like planning and proposals and focused work, like things I can tell are the most important thing they want to work on that week. And that they just spend Monday until lunch doing that, because they know that once that gets done, like, the week is golden.
That is
but if they do that first, then they've already achieved enough before Monday lunch that most people won't get to till Friday afternoon.
Oh, that's a good one. So along that lines, and as we're wrapping up here, I would love for you to share your top 3 success tips for our listeners.
So I would definitely suggest that your listeners try tracking their time, ideally for a week. Even if you can't get through a whole week, try 2 weekdays and one weekend day, right? Just to get some sort of holistic picture of your life, to see where the time is really going, because often we just have no idea. And it's really hard to spend time better if you don't know where it's going now, because you don't know if you're changing the right things or not. The second thing I would tell people to do is to really think about what you want to spend more time doing. we spend a lot of time figuring out what we want to get off our plates, and that's got its place. But better to figure out, well, what do I really want to do with my time, and how can I make sure that happens? Because when you do those awesome, wonderful things, like everything else will naturally take less time. And then the third tip I would say is to think about how you use those little bits of time. I know that probably 99% of us, when we've got 5 minutes or so, we pull out the phone and start deleting email, which feels incredibly productive. Like, look at how many emails I've deleted. Yay. But it's not going to be on your tombstone that you deleted all your email. So you might want to think about what else you could do in that time. For me, it's turned out to be reading literature is really great. But, you could meditate, you could pray, you could reach out to people you want to talk to, you can journal, you can write a few lines of poetry or something. I don't know, whatever it is. But if you use those small bits of space, they truly add up. And if you use them in ways that feel wonderful to you, you will have a lot more joy and meaning in your life.
What are you working on next?
I have a book coming out next spring that is called Off the Clock. And the subtitle is, I think currently, The Fine Art of Feeling Less Busy While Getting More Done. Ooh. And I look at time perception. I've done some research into how people feel about their time and how that corresponds with how they spend their time, and the differences between people who feel like they have a lot of time and people who don't, because we all have the same 24 hours in a day. So what are people doing differently when they feel like they have a lot of time versus people who don't?
Oh, I love that. So where can our listeners go to learn more about you? You mentioned that you have that downloadable template, which sounds like a super useful resource. Where can they go to learn more about you and to get their hands on some of these tools that you offer?
Yeah, so please come visit me at my website, lauravanderkam.com. That's just my name, if you can see the spelling of my name on the podcast somewhere. I blog 4 times a week, roughly, so lots of new content there. And there's a great discussion going on all the time at my blog. My commenters are so much better than most people on the internet. Like, they're nice, they're smart. So I welcome people being part of that, too. So please come visit me there.
Awesome. Well, listen, this was so much fun and so inspiring, insightful, and also practical and useful. I so appreciate you sharing your insight with us.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate being on.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to Fierce Feminine Leadership. Be sure to head over to iTunes and subscribe to the show. While you're there, leave us a fierce review. When you leave a review, your name is automatically entered into a monthly draw. Each month, we'll draw one reviewer to automatically receive a private coaching session with women's leadership expert Eleanor Beaton. So remember, head over to iTunes and subscribe to the show. Then leave us a review for your chance to win a private coaching session with Eleanor Beaton. Go to eleanorbeatonpodcast.com and sign up to get your free cheat sheet, The 5 Critical Leadership Skills of 7-Figure Businesswomen. This free download will help you diagnose the exact skills you need to see major growth in your business and career. Head over to eleanorbeatonpodcast.com and get your free download today.